So, welcome, my friends. We are about to jump into some really awesome training with our guru, Roy, who I have told you about. So, Roy, welcome.
Welcome, Phil. How are you doing today?
I'm doing awesome. It's great to be on another Agile adventure.
Always.
And we have a couple of our friends here have been in one of the classes we did not too long ago. So it will be like a refresh for some of those guys. But let me go ahead and really quickly just share a few fast facts about the class. So we call it Agile for Practitioners. Sometimes we might refer to it as Agile for PMP exam students, or some to that effect, and CAPM students too. As you know, the PMI have put in their outlines that Agile will be tested on both the CAPM and the PMP. So we call it Agile for Practitioners. And I'll just go ahead and ask Roy to do a quick intro for us based on what we see on the screen.
Absolutely. So hello, everyone. Glad to be here. Hope you are having a good day and enjoying your time quarantined as everybody is right now. So as Phil mentioned, my name is Roy Schilling. I'm an Agile coach and trainer. And what that means is I go into organizations and I help them understand what Agile is all about. And sometimes I stay with them for a little while to help them go through at least the early stages of their transformation. So I have about 30 years. Actually, I'm kind of lying there. I have a little more than 30 years of experience now, dating myself a little bit too much, I think. 30, let's just call it 30 plus years of IT experience. And been in a number of different industries. So I've also participated. I was a developer for a number of years, a contract developer. I was in the technology space for quite a long time, mostly in banking and manufacturing and places like that, which is where I really got my experience in Agile. That's where I got my love for improving process and making things work better in organizations. I've also been working with international teams for a number of years, and I'm sure that you can imagine working with international teams, not just in an Agile space, but in any kind of a space, can be really challenging. The time zone challenges, things like that. So I've done a lot of work in that space. Maybe I can share some tips and techniques on how to work with those teams a little bit better and keep them efficient as possible. So that's pretty much about me. Don't need to spend a lot of time there. Back to you, Phil.
Thank you, Roy. Roy is also, by the way, extremely patient. And I actually got a lot of tips from watching him train. And I started incorporating a lot of what I saw him do into my own classes. So I'll ask you guys to, if you have any questions, you can put them in the chat, but we're going to be taking your questions at the end of each hour. So we'll give it about an hour. We'll go on a quick bio break, and then we'll take the questions towards that 1 hour mark, just before we cut out for our break. So if you hold your fire till then, or if you want to share it in the chat, I'll be the curator of all those questions. You guys on the call already know who I am. So my name's Phil. I'm your friend, your colleague, one of the co-trainers here, and just trying to usher you through the trajectory to get in PMP certified, but with a slant towards Agile. You know, my ambition, I'll just tell you my own ambition, is to get you guys to know as much of what Roy is going to be sharing with you, so that when your boss asks you to run a project using an Agile approach, you won't be at sea. You'll know exactly what your boss means. Few fast facts, right? Organizations increasingly embrace Agile as a technique for managing projects. A full 71% of organizations report using Agile approaches for their projects, sometimes, often, or always. Think about that. So if your company is not already using Agile, the likelihood of them using Agile in the not too distant future is very high. And that is exactly why we put this together. So you guys will be very comfortable with Agile concepts. You will not be at sea. And if your boss ever asks you to get on a bandwagon and to do something Agile, you'll know exactly what your boss means. Okay, so without much ado, I'll hand it over to Roy. And thank you, Roy. Take it away.
Great. Thanks very much, Phil. So again, welcome everyone. Where we'd like to get started today is I know that some of you might have some Agile experience and most of you may not. But where I'd like to start today is talk a little bit about what Agile is about. Today, so we're going to cover some of the core concepts, some of the foundational elements to make sure that you have a good starting point for what Agile's about, why are we doing Agile, maybe some things to watch out for. And certainly we want to talk about some of the challenges that you might have going to an Agile environment, because it's not as easy as some people might think. One thing I really do want to focus on, I always like to focus this on my classes, especially with folks that are coming from a PMP background, is to make sure that you don't have any fear or anxiety toward making use of Agile practices. It's very important for you to feel very confident and comfortable in these practices, because they are not anything to be nervous about, as long as we're following good practices and we're well disciplined in doing them. I'm sure you've read lots of things on the internet about chaos in the Agile space and things like that. And I would suggest that if there's a lot of chaos in your space, if there's a lot of some bad practices, I would suggest that they're really not doing Agile the right way. So let's make sure that you understand how to do it well, so that you can manage that chaos, so that you can manage that change and not have the fear and anxiety. Be confident as you're adopting these practices. So let's start out with the basics. Let's talk about what Agile really is. Now, I'm sure you've read some things on the internet about the concept of Agile. It's an iterative approach, engages flexibility so that you can make decisions faster, things like that. But that's all true. So it's iterative. It's a very fast and flexible kind of process where you can make lots of changes, lots of decisions in very, very small increments. And that's very beneficial. But Agile's more than that. The really hard part of Agile is not the practices, but more about the behaviors and the mindset changes, the psychology behind how we do this work. There are going to be some things that we're going to talk about today, especially, that are really going to challenge some of your perceptions, challenge the way that you've done things in the past. Now, again, you shouldn't have fear about that, but you should look at it and say, how can I make this work in my space? But it's very, very different from what you may have experienced in the past. There's going to be a lot less feeling of control. And some of you might recognize that control is maybe not necessarily something that you always have, but we have a feeling of control anyway. And Agile kind of gives us some mechanisms so that we have better control, actually, a lot less control. There's a lot of psychology behind this, a lot of mindset changes, and that can be one of the most difficult things for us to understand and get through in an Agile environment when you're starting to embark on this process. So that's kind of the background of Agile. Now, you also just a very, very quick history lesson of Agile. Agile is not something that's new. It's not something that's happened in the last decade. It's been around for a really, really long time. It actually started way back in the 80s, where that was actually when the first Scrum team was stood up, was back, I think it was 1990. But Agile practices have been engaged for a very, very long time. This is not something that's really new, but they've really become mainstream over the past maybe decade and a half. And the reason is that technology has caught up. Technology is evolving so fast today that you can't use some of the more traditional approaches in some environments because it changes too fast. You can't have a year-long or multi-year project anymore and expect for it to be successful by the end. Things change too fast. Today, if you have a multi-year project, by the time you get to the end of it, the technology that you're making use of might be obsolete. I had that happen to me on a project a number of years ago. It was a very lengthy project. By the time we got to the end of the project, the technology was obsolete. And if we had been using more iterative approaches, then perhaps we could have made some adjustments along the way and delivered faster. So that's kind of the concept. So let's move on. Let's talk a little bit about, I'm going to share my screen now. Let's move on and talk a little bit about the Agile Manifesto. Let's share my screen. 1 second. There we go. Sorry, having some difficulty sharing my screen right now. We'll get there in 1 second. There we go. All right. Awesome. Okay. Technology challenges are always fun. All right. So this is the Agile Manifesto. The manifesto is kind of the core of all of the Agile practices. And basically what it does is it defines a set of values and principles for us to help us make good decisions. There is a great quote by Roy Disney. His statement was, if you understand your values, then making decisions is easy. And Agile makes use of that concept. It's a way for us to look at what we believe in, what we feel is the right thing to do. And when we're faced with a difficult decision, we can compare it against our values and our principles so that we can understand if this is a good decision or not. So it's very important for us to understand. So I spent a little bit of time on the manifesto, making sure that you understand what these are really all about. Now, as you should be able to see on your screen, there are 4 values. There are also 12 principles that we're going to talk about in a minute, but let's start out with the values. Now, the Agile Manifesto was something that was put together back all the way back in 2001. And it was done because there were a number of industry thought leaders, people that had been practicing Agile in different forms for a number of years. And they felt that they really needed to bring the industry together to have something to rally around. And it took a little bit of time for them to put this together, as you can imagine. But the idea here is something simple for us, again, to help us make decisions. So it starts out by saying we are uncovering better ways of developing product by doing it and helping others do it. And through this work, we have come to value. Now, here are the 4 values. And I want to make sure you understand these because they're very simple. And so they cause a lot of myths and misunderstandings. So let's make sure we understand what we really mean by these so you take them forward and you can actually make use of them. So the first value is that we value individuals and interactions over processes and tools. Now, I really want to point out the word over. It doesn't mean instead of. So there's lots of processes and tools that we do make use of. We use tools all the time. We're using one right now to be able to do these webinars. Lots of tools are going to be made use of, and processes as well. Scrum, Kanban, the XP. These are all different processes that we make use of, plus others as well. Now, those are very important to us, but we recognize what's far more important are the people doing the work and how they interact with each other. We don't want to build teams of people where they are just working as individuals and in silos. We want to build teams where they work together as a team. We want the teams to be self-empowered so they can make decisions for themselves, so they can enjoy their work, they can have fun, they can make decisions. And these are things that are all really important in building great teams. We spend a lot of time in the Agile space talking about team behavior, making sure that they are responding well, that they are disciplined, that they are good engineers. We've put a very high emphasis on quality of product and service that we're delivering. So building these great teams and ensuring that they can interact well with each other is an extremely important part of the entire process. Now, the next one is working product over comprehensive documentation. Now, this is the one that causes the biggest myth out there, and that is that the concept of not doing documentation. Well, that's actually not the way we do it. Again, I want to emphasize the word over. We do documentation. There are certain industries that if you don't do documentation, people could go to jail. That's certainly not something that we want to do. And I want to make sure that we view this appropriately. Documentation is part of your process. It's part of the job. But what we're trying to do here is we're trying to suggest that the documentation typically is not the product you're producing. Documentation is there to support the production or development of that product. So while useful, it shouldn't be your primary focus. The primary focus should be the working product, the thing that you're actually building or the service that you're providing. That's what your customers are typically looking for. Now, obviously, documentation is important to help us support that product or service. And it's also helpful for us for communicating and making sure that we have organizational memory so that next people can come in, or another group of people or new people that you hire can come in and have something to start with. So documentation is very important to us, but it should be there in support of delivering the product, not the other way around. Now, we typically run afoul of this in more traditional approaches. I've seen this happen a lot in organizations. They even I've worked for organizations that view that as long as you're getting the documentation done on time and on schedule, then that means that you're going to be successfully delivering the product. Well, I think we all know from experience that that's not necessarily true. Again, the documentation is valuable, but just by doing documentation doesn't mean that you're successfully delivering the product. So we're going to change the way we measure success. Instead of measuring success by the triple constraints, and those are still aspects. We're going to talk about this more in some coming slides. But we're going to measure more about the actual delivery of the product and customer satisfaction. So we're going to be talking about that a lot more. So documentation is important, but let's make sure we're only doing documentation that's necessary and doing it at the right time, not doing it in phases. We'll talk a lot more about that. I don't want you to be concerned about not delivering documentation, because absolutely there will be documentation. So the next one is customer collaboration over contract negotiation. Now, what we're talking about, let's go to the contract negotiation. In this case, many times we're talking about contracts. These are like requirements documents, things that we have said, we would like you to build this, and then a team goes off and they build it, right? That's kind of the idea. And you're all used to requirements documents. Now, I'm sure you might have been on a project like this, where you might have delivered exactly what was specified in a requirements document. But when you hand it over to your customer 6 months or a year later, they're not actually happy with the delivery. Now, this happens often because maybe the customer didn't know what they wanted. They had an idea of what they were trying to solve, an idea of what might work for them. But until they start seeing it, they really don't have a good idea of what the solution should be. So often at the beginning of a project, when we know the least, we go through spend a lot of time defining what we want when we don't necessarily truly can't understand what we want. So there's an interesting study done about the amount of change in a project. The industry average a percentage of change in requirements is actually 35%. So 35% of your requirements on average are going to change over the course of a project. Now, if that's the case, how can you possibly know at the beginning of a project what it is that the customer wants? It's going to change. Now, in traditional approaches, we handle that by change management, change controls, things like that. And while they may not necessarily go away, we're going to de-emphasize change controls because they're typically an onerous process. Not always, but they're typically very onerous. They take a lot of time, and they're very expensive, and they're typically designed to restrict change. The reason for that is we've spent a lot of time up front doing all of this planning work. That's a lot of money that we've spent. So we typically want to reduce change and manage change so that it doesn't have as much impact on the money that we've already spent. Well, we take a slightly different approach in the Agile process. And that is we're going to do less upfront planning. Doesn't mean we don't do any, it just means we do less. And we're going to continue throughout the entire project to do planning. And we're going to allow that change to happen as it's discovered. So since we've spent less time up front and less money up front doing all that planning, and we're allowing change to happen throughout the entire process, that means that we have a higher probability that the product that we deliver at the end is going to be something your customers really want. Now, what we're saying by this value is that it's more important for us to talk with our customers, understand what they truly want, and continually talk with them throughout the entire project, not just at the beginning and at the end, but throughout the entire project. We keep our customers engaged. And that way, as we're developing the product, the customer gets to see it being built. And customer, just to let you know, customer can be a very gray term. It could be internal, external, it could be stakeholders, people using the product or buying or paying for the product. You get the idea. Customer is a very kind of fuzzy word. But the idea is we involve our customers consistently or throughout the entire project, give them an opportunity to see the product as it's being developed. And that way they are able to learn what their needs truly are. I've seen this happen all the time. I'm sure you've seen it too, where somebody has requested something, and then by the time it gets to the end of a project, it's not what they really needed. So in this way, they get to see it in process. And that way, the change that happens is a lot less expensive and it's a lot faster. So change management still happens in an Agile process, but we de-emphasize the control aspect. We allow change to happen, and it's managed much more iteratively and incrementally rather than through change controls. All right, moving on, let's talk a little bit about responding to change, the last value. Now, responding to change over following a plan. The idea here is that plans are important. More important, though, is the planning process. Through the process of planning, we get better understanding of what's needed, what our customers' needs are, what their challenges are, how our team interacts. So the actions of planning are extremely valuable. And you're going to discover, if you're not doing Agile today, you will discover that you do more planning in Agile than you've ever done in your life. You plan every single day. So again, the difference, instead of doing all of our big upfront planning, we plan continuously as things are uncovered along the way. Now, this way, we're allowed to manage change. We're allowed to respond to change and let it happen throughout the process rather than going through this onerous change control process. Now, the way I like to do this is, again, our customers don't always know what they want. So if we try to plan everything up front, we have to have a very strong change control process to make sure that we understand the impact to our project. But allowing the change to happen throughout and changing the plan to reflect the new reality, that allows us to deliver something, our customers truly want. So again, let's now that we've talked about the values, let's go back to something that's I feel is really important. We need to redefine success. Now, often on traditional projects, we define success as being on time, on budget, and on scope. The triple constraints, you're all familiar with that. But that doesn't necessarily mean that our customers are going to be happy. So in those triple constraints, if that's what we use to define success, where's customer satisfaction? Where's quality? Those are those hidden constraints that typically cause projects to fail. Even though you may have delivered everything requested on time, on budget, you still might have a failed project if the customer doesn't want it. So it's more important for us to deliver something that's going to be used and valuable by our customers than it is to deliver what was originally specified. Now, that's a critical aspect for us to understand as we're learning more about Agile. It's not just about delivering a project. It's about delivering something of value to your customers that will truly give you some kind of return and make your customers happy. Okay? All right, so let's move on a little bit and let's now talk about the rest of the manifesto. And these are the 12 principles. I'll move a little bit quickly now on the principles. So principle number one is the most important principle. The authors of this document or artifact said that this has to be our first principle. This is the most important thing out of everything that we do, regardless of the process that we use. Now, something that you might find, you might discover as you're reading through the manifesto, and that is, it's really not about Agile. You can apply any process to the manifesto. You can do this in traditional approaches. This is really it's not about the process. It's about what things are important to us as an organization and as individuals. Things about satisfying our customers, keeping our customers happy. That's true of any process. So hopefully you'll be able to see these as things that you can make use of today. Even if you don't ever use any Agile processes, you should be able to start using some of these concepts and improve your traditional approaches. Nothing wrong with that. So the first principle, again, is to satisfy our customers through early and continuous delivery of valuable product. Now, I want to point something out here. The most important part of the principle is satisfy our customer. But we do that through early and continuous delivery of valuable product. So a couple of things to unpack there. First, valuable product. We can be delivering a lot of things to our customers, but if it doesn't have value, then fantastic. We've produced a lot of things, but it's not doing anything for our customers. It's not doing anything for us as an organization either. So it has to be things that are valuable, not just focusing on speed, but more importantly, focusing on the value of what you're delivering. If you think about it this way, if you can deliver one thing that is extremely valuable and delights your customers, that's far better than delivering 100 things that bring no value whatsoever. So again, focus on value. That should be more important to you than just meeting a deadline or producing a whole bunch of things. What we're looking for is the outcome of happy customers, not the output of delivering a whole bunch of stuff. All right, the other thing to unpack from this is early and continuous delivery. Now, in some cases, this might make you a little nervous as well, that we're delivering things very early in our process and we're delivering things continuously. That means we're going to do releases as often as we possibly can. Now, this can be very contextual. It depends on the project, depends on the kind of product you're building. Some things you can't deliver in small increments directly to your customers. You have to do a big bang. But for the most part, the vast majority of work that we do, you should be able to break it down into smaller, valuable pieces and deliver it incrementally so our customers are able to give us feedback. They're able to give us direction, make sure we're going the right way with the product, and that we're always delivering something of value to our customers. That's kind of the idea. And that's a core concept for all Agile processes, and I would suggest this is a core concept that you should take even if you're not doing Agile. So next one is welcome changing requirements. This one gets scary, especially for project managers and for the people developing the product. This one is very, very scary. We are going to allow changes to happen even late in the project. Now, this sounds like it's going to be chaos and that we're going to allow things to happen last second, and then it's going to be a really, really bad thing is going to happen, right? Well, that's not actually what we're talking about. If you think about it this way, changes is a good thing because it allows us to change directions as our market changes, as our reality changes. You may have seen it. You might have had this happen to you at some point in time. There might have been situations where you're in the middle of a project and now all of a sudden the market has changed. Like take the current situation. The market has drastically changed. So what do you do when that happens? You have to be flexible. You have to make changes. You have to allow that to happen in order to stay competitive. I have a number of customers that had dramatic change happen, and I'm sure you're going through some of that yourselves. One of the clients I support is a very large network appliance manufacturer. And they're having a really good quarter actually because of this, because people are working remotely. So there's a lot higher demand for networking equipment and networking services. So as a result of this, they've had to change directions very, very fast. And some of the longer term projects that they felt were important right now are less important. So now they are focusing more on keeping up with demand, making sure that they're able to deliver products that are reacting to this current situation. So again, allow that change to happen, but that does not mean change chaos. This does not mean that we're going to have scope creep. What we're really talking about here is we want to make sure that we have lots of good feedback from our customers, and we allow this change to happen naturally. So what you're going to discover with this is that instead of having big changes at the end of a project, like you're used to in traditional approaches, since our customers are involved throughout the entire project, what you're going to see is smaller incremental changes throughout the project. That means you don't have those big scary things at the end. They happen in smaller pieces along the way, so it's a lot easier to manage, and you don't have to worry about the big onerous change control processes, okay? All right, so let's move on to the next one. This is deliver working product frequently. So this is kind of restating a little bit about the early continuous delivery of product. We want to deliver product as fast as possible. Now, there are some customers or some companies that can do this very, very fast. Take a look at Amazon as an example. They deliver product multiple hundreds of times every single day. That's just because they have significant automation in place. They have significant automated test cases. So they have their processes and environments set up to enable very, very fast delivery of product. Now, not everybody is like that. And most organizations are built around traditional approaches. So that means you may not be able to deliver that fast. Chances are you're not able to do that. And that's okay. That doesn't mean that Agile doesn't work for you. What we're trying to suggest, though, is that you should be able to deliver as fast as your organization can do it, and then spend time improving automation and improving approaches so that you can deliver even faster. If you think about it this way, if you're delivering very, very fast to your customers, that means that your competition has to keep up with you. That's a really good place to be in the marketplace. The faster you are, the more difficult it is for your competition. Now, let's put a constraint on that. Delivering fast does not mean delivering bad stuff. You deliver very high quality stuff at all times. Never sacrifice quality. Quality is something that your customers will get very upset with if it's poor quality product. So it's deliver high quality product as fast as possible. Now, ideally, we want to do this a couple of weeks or even every day if you can get away with it. But again, you may not be able to do that. So let's say that you can't. Let's say that you're unable to deliver every couple of weeks. Well, that's okay. You incrementally are building product every couple of weeks so you have something that is potentially ready for production. Now, you might need to package up multiple increments together in order to have something that's usable by your customers. And that's perfectly fine. But we should have it built into our processes to look for ways for improving so that we can speed up and deliver even faster. Okay, that's kind of the concept. All right, next one is actually really, really important. And this is business people and developers must work together daily throughout the project. Now, this one is one of our biggest challenges in the Agile space. And the reason is that most organizations are not set up this way. We actually want customers or stakeholders. We want people who represent the customers at the very minimum to work with the team doing the work on a daily basis. Now, a lot of challenges happen here. First, sometimes the people building the work and the people requesting the work may not have a good relationship. That's a real challenge. They may not be aligned. And we're trying to force them together and trying to encourage them to work together as a team. And that can be very difficult organizationally. You can think about the behaviors that might cause. So a lot of anxiety, a little bit of stress, and perhaps some opportunities where things aren't going the right way. So this can be a challenge. The other challenge that we get out of this, that this may cause, is that often our business space may not be staffed to be able to do this. So getting the time from our business people can be extremely difficult. But think about it this way. Think about the value of doing this. This is just one of them. But one of the biggest forms of waste in any project, regardless of what process you're following, is waiting. Waiting for answers, waiting for decisions, waiting for equipment, waiting for whatever, right? Now, if the people requesting the work are working with the team on a daily basis, that wait time, at least for decisions and direction, things like that, that significantly is decreased because you've got somebody that you can go to at a moment's notice to get answers. So the productivity of the team goes up dramatically. You're also building up a better relationship, so you're in closer alignment with the people requesting the work, your stakeholders, your business folks. So now that you're in close alignment, now you are able to build more realistically what your customer wants. If you're not able to do something, the customer isn't going to blame the team for doing these things because they're in constant contact. They're shared. It's shared accountability. The important thing here is it's not just the team building the work that's accountable for the delivery of the product. It's also the people requesting the work. So now, excuse me, now we build up an environment where we have shared accountability. We have business and IT or whoever is developing the product. They're in close alignment, working together and have shared accountability for successful delivery of the product. Now imagine the finger pointing that can be stopped because of this. Both parties are accountable for delivering product. That means you can get rid of at least some of the politics in your organization. So I think you might be able to see why this is difficult. This may require organizational change. So when we're talking about an agile process, it's not just about following the basic practices. It's also looking at how your organization is structured, looking at how your teams are built, looking at how people behave, and making sure that they behave in the ways that we want them to behave. Develop good behaviors, good practices, and good relationships between team members. That's the hard part of Agile. Following the practices, at the end of this session and the next session, you will understand the basic practices of how to do Agile. It's not difficult. The hard part is how you behave and how the people around you behave. And that's what's going to take time. All right, next one, principle number 5. This is, to me, the most important organizational principle since we were talking about organizational change. And we want to build projects around motivated individuals, give them an environment and support that they need, and trust them to get the job done. Now, there's a lot to unpack in this one. Let's start with trust. Now, it's really important to be able to build trust, not just within the team, so the team members trust each other implicitly, but also that leaders can trust the team and the team can trust their leadership. Often that is very difficult to build. This is a really hard thing for a lot of organizations. I've worked with a lot of companies where there is practically no trust whatsoever. So we need to build that up. So now building that trust is really the critical aspect of principle number 5. So now let's talk about how we get there. So it first starts out by hiring good people. We expect in an Agile practice and an Agile organization that we are going to hire adults. And that means these are people that want to do their jobs. They do them well. They enjoy their jobs. And we don't have to babysit them. You should never, ever hear in an Agile environment that we need to drive people to do their jobs. The team members should be expected to do them. If you have team members that you've hired or the organization has hired that don't do their jobs, maybe we need to have some serious conversations about that. We should think about Why do they not want to do their job? Did we hire badly? Are we not giving them an environment where they can be motivated to want to do their jobs? What's the problem? And fix it. So you should not have to drive people. You should be able to take a step back and expect them to do their jobs. Now, the good thing with the Agile practices, that might sound a little bit scary too, is that, people are just going to do things and there's lack of control. And it really isn't that way. It's very disciplined, very transparent. We have lots of visibility. So we build basically a trust and verify process. We're going to trust the team. We start out by trusting the team to do their jobs. But it's completely transparent to what the team is working on, what their progress is, what their challenges are. So we have absolute transparency into what's going on as long as the team is being honest. So we need to help with that a little bit. And typically what we do is we have someone on the team that's really dedicated to helping to build good behaviors on the team, helping to make sure that the team is following good practices and that they're being honest and transparent. So while they're not being driven, we do have someone focusing in the team on the behaviors and good practices of that team. That person is typically called a Scrum Master. It's a silly word, it's a crazy word, right? But basically the idea of the Scrum Master is that they are there to facilitate good practices and good behaviors. They are entirely focused on the speed and the well-being of that team. So if you have a team that can improve, it's motivated, you've hired good people that want to do their jobs, now that's fantastic. That's a great starting point. But what if we have an environment where they can't stay motivated? Motivation is a two-way street. You can hire somebody that's highly self-motivated, but that could be destroyed pretty fast if the environment doesn't support it. If people are getting yelled at, if they can't trust their leadership, if they can't be honest and open without being yelled at, then transparency tends to shut down. So this is a two-way street. The team has to be open and honest so that leadership can do their job, and leadership needs to treat the team with respect and allow the team to make mistakes and treat them properly so that they know that so that the team knows that they can trust their leadership and be vulnerable with their leadership and not get beat up. So again, with a lot of psychology and behavior management that we're talking about here, a lot of behavioral physics we deal with. So let's not just focus on hiring a bunch of people, having them go off and do work. We also need to focus on building great teams that interact well and building great leaders that know how to manage and lead a team. All right, let's move on. Let's do principle number 6. And this is this one is really important right now. And that is the most efficient and effective method of conveying information to and within a team is face-to-face conversation. Now, this is kind of funny when you think about it, right, at this point in life. So face-to-face conversation right now is exceedingly difficult, but it's often very difficult anyway. If you think about it, most organizations are virtual. They have locations all over the world. So this can be a little bit of a challenge. Now, we're not saying that you can't do Agile if your teams are not co-located. That's not the point. What we're saying is the best team, the best communication and collaboration you can build for a team is where people are co-located, working together every single day. There are lots of reasons why that can't happen. So then you go to your plan B, as it were, right? And we use tools. That's how we help with this. We use the virtual tools, Zoom and WebEx and all those other kinds of tools that help us communicate better. We have a very heavy use of webcams. We turn on the webcam so we can get that visual communication going, see how people are reacting to things. It also helps us to see if they are, typing on their keyboard and not listening, making sure that we actually get to put a face with a voice, that sort of thing. Now, the biggest challenge with building teams is co-locating. Most teams are distributed, or at least in different buildings, and often around the world. So time zones can be a significant challenge in building good remote team building. So that can be a really significant challenge. Often you might only get a couple of hours a day where you can actually talk with each other. And that really, it becomes very difficult. So there's lots of ways that we can work with that. We'll talk about a few of them over the next couple of days, or today's session and next week's session. One of them, just very quickly, is to try to build teams geographically co-located. So even if they can't be in the physical building, at least if they're in the same region, try to build a team that way. That way the time zone lessens as a challenge. But even that isn't always possible. Now, we'll talk about this one in more detail. I'm sure we're probably very interested in how to build good teams this way. But here's another tip. This is not just about Agile. You can use these techniques that we're going to talk about for teams doing doing traditional approaches as well. No matter what process you follow, you want to build good teams. So let's talk about some techniques about how to do that. Okay. Now let's move on. Let's talk about the last 6 principles. Now this section will move a little bit quicker, and then we'll get talking a little more about some of the benefits of Agile. So let's talk about principle number 7. This one's really important to me. When this says working product is the primary measure of progress. Now this is a very important difference in how we're going to measure progress. In traditional approaches, we typically manage progress for percentage complete or by completion of phases. One of the big differences that you'll notice between Agile and traditional approaches is that traditional approaches are more phased approach and Agile is a value approach. So you try to get rid of the phases. You don't typically have, and sometimes you do, so I'm not saying it never happens this way, but you don't typically have a requirements gathering phase, a design phase, a development phase, a testing phase. You don't typically have phases. Now, there's lots of reasons for that. One reason is that when you have phases, you typically have handoffs between one group to another. Now, in more traditional environments, it's viewed as being efficient to have like-minded, like-skilled people working together on teams. They do their job, and when they're done, they hand their work over to another team and then do a knowledge transfer. We view that as very inefficient. What we prefer to do is have the whole team working together, people collecting requirements, people doing design, people building, people verifying, and the people that might be collecting requirements and understanding those requirements, in other words, business people, all working together on a single team. That way we reduce the handoffs. Every time you do a handoff, it requires documentation, it requires knowledge transfer, and it's an opportunity to lose information. So we want to reduce those handoffs as much as possible. So we try to stay away from phases as much as possible. And we also don't measure progress by phases. So we don't say just because our requirements have been collected that we are a certain percentage complete on a project. Because just because you've collected your requirements doesn't mean that you've actually done anything but collect requirements. You haven't built anything. The true measure of progress is actually building the product. So all of these things are important. We still collect requirements. We still do design. We still build and verify. All of these things are important, but we don't measure the progress by those phases. We measure progress only by how much stuff we've built. Now that might seem a little strange and it's going to take a little bit of time to get used to, but if you think about it, nothing is as important as delivering the product. The phases don't matter. Building the product matters. Now, when I say the phases don't matter, of course, we still need to do design. We still need to do requirements. All of these things are good engineering practices. So we don't throw all of that stuff out. We just do it in lighter, smaller, incremental phases. I even said it. I even said phase there. But, iterative, increments, throughout the entire process. All right, so that's the basic idea there. So we also think about it this way. Percentage complete is one of my personal least favorite metrics. I'm not saying that we get rid of percent complete entirely. Of course, we still do need some measure of where we are in the overall process. So we still do it. We just do it a little bit different way. But if you think about how we collect percentage complete, it's kind of arbitrary. And it often doesn't represent what we think it represents. I'm sure you've had this happen. Let's go through an example here. Let's say that you're working on a project, and every 2 weeks you get your team together and you ask them, what percentage complete are you? And things are moving along. Fantastic. They're 10%, they're 20%. Every 2 weeks, they're incrementally getting better, 50%, and moving along in the project. Now you're getting close to the end of the project. And you ask them, what percentage complete are they? And they say, hey, we're 90% complete. Then the next 2 weeks, we're 91%, then 92%. And what that usually means, they've been procrastinating throughout the entire project. giving what they feel might be appropriate numbers, we hope anyway. And now that they're getting close to the end, they realize, uh-oh, we're in trouble. We're running out of time, and I need to start reflecting the reality of where we actually are. So those percentage completes can be exceedingly misleading until you're actually building product and actually showing it to your customers. That's not really a very good measure of progress. It's an indicator and useful, but it's not a measure of the actual progress. Hopefully that makes sense. All right, moving on. Number 8, Agile process promotes sustainable development. Sponsors, developers, and users should be able to maintain a constant pace indefinitely. Now, this one's really important for a lot of reasons. The first thing is that we don't like overtime. Agile, we're really kind of against the overtime concept. We don't want to work teams harder. We want to work teams smarter. I know that's a bit of a cliche, but the idea is, think about it this way, if your team is working a lot of overtime, they're putting in 60, 70, 80-hour weeks, then they're tired. The chances are that quality is going to suffer. They're under a lot of stress and pressure to work done and deliver based on a deadline. They're tired, their quality is going to suffer, their intellect is suffering, their personal lives might suffer. I know people whose health have suffered as a result of working too much overtime. We don't want to be responsible for that. What we want to get to is honesty. And the fact is that if we are forcing our team members to work overtime, that's not a very honest, healthy environment for our team members to work. We should be able to work at a regular pace. And I'm not saying no overtime is ever going to happen. That's not obviously the reality. But maybe if teams are able to work a regular, consistent pace, generally around a normal work week, then maybe they can be more innovative, more creative, focus more on quality, have better ideas, and produce better quality product more efficiently. So rather than forcing them to do more than they can do in the amount of time that they have to do it, instead, let's talk about the reality of what is possible to get done and what's not. Now, here's a real challenge. I'm sure you're thinking this already. Stakeholders don't like to hear that a deadline's not going to get hit. So we have to engage a lot of stakeholder management and make sure that our stakeholders understand why. Now, the good thing is we collect a lot of data. Some of the data that we collect is related to how much a team is able to produce every couple of weeks. So if we have data that represents consistently what a team is able to do, then you can use that data in those discussions with your stakeholders. If a stakeholder is asking for 6 months worth of work in a 2-month period of time, that's not going to happen. And we have data to back that up. So it makes the discussions a little bit easier to work with. And we'll talk more about that in the upcoming time. But the idea is be honest, be direct, train your stakeholders and your leadership to understand what it means to work within a time box. The alternative of not working within that time box, with not encouraging a sustainable pace, means that team members get tired, quality suffers, efficiency suffers, and perhaps people leave. That's exceedingly expensive. I saw one of my clients told me that in order to replace somebody, it costs 2.5 times the cost of that employee in order to replace them. That's insanely expensive. So we want to focus on customer retention, building an environment where they want to stay and they're happy with their jobs. And working overtime can really crush that. So let's pay some attention to that. All right, next one, continuous attention to technical excellence and good design enhances agility. So we view this as really important. Quality, good design, good engineering practices, following great standards, making sure we are doing a good job and being good corporate citizens is essential to the Agile process. So don't take shortcuts. Don't do sloppy work. Follow good practices. Do reviews of people. Do reviews of their work. Make sure that they're doing peer reviews and doing a good job at all times. By building good, high-quality product, it actually enables the team to go even faster. So let me give you a software example real quick. And Agile is not just about software anymore. It's in just about any industry you can think of. But a good software example, I was a developer for a long, long time. And I can promise you over the course of my career that I had found and, honestly, maybe produced some software that wasn't necessarily very good. Anytime that happens, anytime you have software that's not good, it means that someone in the future is going to have to slow down if they make a modification to that piece of product. We don't want that to happen. If it's good, high quality, following standards, good stuff, then any team member should be able to go into that product, fix it fast, change it fast, and get back out again so they can be as fast as possible. Bad quality slows us down, right? So just keep that in mind. Number 10 is my personal favorite principle. And that is, it's worded a little bit strangely, so make sure you understand this one. And that is simplicity, the art of maximizing the amount of work not done, is essential. Very strange phrasing for this one. Basically means don't do stuff you don't have to do. If there's documentation that's not necessary, requirements that are not necessary, anything that is not essential, we should evaluate it to decide, is this really important and should we actually do it? Or should we do it this way? Maybe there's a better way of doing it that's less costly. So always look at everything you're doing, policies, practices, requirements, processes, everything that we do, we should be seeing, is this really essential? And if it's not, maybe we should stop doing it, okay? Now, I do think it's funny, a little bit ironic, that the statement about simplicity is worded in such a complex fashion. I don't think they quite got the idea on this one, so maybe they really should have changed this a little bit. All right, next one. Best architectures, requirements, and designs emerge from self-organizing teams. Here's another critical change from traditional processes, or traditional organizations, more to the point, and agile organizations. And that is the concept of the self-organizing team. Now, what we mean by this is that the team is able to make decisions for themselves. We decentralize the decision-making, not all decisions, but the day-to-day decisions, how the team works, how they build things, design, some basic design decisions, a lot of decisions about how the product is built and who is going to build the product. It's done by the team. We don't need somebody with oversight onto the team to tell them what to do. You think about it this way. Is it better to use the mind of one team member, the team lead or a manager, or is it better to use the wisdom of the entire team? Obviously, the more minds are involved, you have a higher probability of getting better decisions. So we shouldn't rely on the decisions of one person. That is input, of course. We rely on our experts, but the team should be able to make decisions for themselves. Now, this can be very scary for people coming from a traditional approach. We're not driving them. We don't have as much oversight on the team. But again, if you go back to principle number 5, we're hiring good people that behave as adults. So if you start with that, it makes the other principles a lot easier. All right, last one, and that is regular intervals. The team reflects on how to become more effective, tunes and adjusts its behavior accordingly. Now, this one you may be familiar with. Let me give you an example of this. So you've probably all done a lessons learned session. And so lessons learned sessions are very useful. They can be very valuable. But what I would suggest is that the idea of the concept of a lessons learned session is very valuable, but the implementation that we have in most traditional organizations is really pretty bad. If you think about it this way, I'm sure you've all done these kinds of sessions. At the end of a project, which may have already failed, we get together and talk about what we could have done better. And that's a great idea, of course, but it's already at the end of a project when it's way too late. We get this huge meeting together of all the participants, could be 30 people, very expensive meeting, to talk about and gripe about all the things that may not have gone so well. Hopefully they're also talking about the things that did go well. Then we take all this information after they're done griping and you put it into a Word document or some other thing like that, put it up on your repository, and then most organizations never look at it again. So we've spent a huge amount of money on this meeting, talked about all these great concepts, and then we basically discard any learnings that we've just had. That's not a great implementing that. The concept of learning and improving, fantastic. The implementation of waiting to the end of the project is not a great way of doing this. So what we do instead, we don't wait till the end of a project. Instead, what we do is every 2 weeks, we get together as a team and we talk about the basic ideas of things of, what went well. Don't forget the things that went well because we don't want to stop doing those. We also talk about the things that maybe didn't go so well and the actions that we want to take to improve. Now, what we're talking about is the things that went well or not so well in the past 2 weeks. So instead of 6 months or a year later, every 2 weeks, we're reviewing the previous 2 weeks to discuss how do we get better. Now you can understand if you keep doing this every 2 weeks, looking for a couple simple actions to improve, instead of waiting to the end of the project, throughout the entire process, you are getting better. So here's something that you can make use of today. You could start using this on your projects right now. You're not even doing Agile, doesn't matter. Do this in Waterfall, it's perfectly fine. Start doing what are called retrospectives. Now, Agile retrospectives, if you're interested in a good book on Agile retrospectives, it's called Agile Retrospectives. The whole title is Agile Retrospectives, Making Good Teams Great. Fantastic book. It's the definitive work on the process of doing retrospectives. The idea is every couple of weeks, get together, talk about how to improve, and define a couple of simple actions and enable them in the next 2 weeks. Then 2 weeks later, get together again and say, all right, well, we took these actions. Are they working? Are they giving us the right results? And if they are, fantastic, continue, and let's look at some more actions. Or if they're not, stop doing them and maybe try a different approach. So you could start doing retrospectives today and you're going to get better. So that's the idea behind the manifesto. So what I think might be a good thing to do, and Phil, if you would like to chime in, is this an appropriate time for us to take some questions and get ready for a break? And Phil, you're muted right now.
Absolutely, Roy. Thank you very much for walking us through. Now, this is actually, like you said, a really perfect time for questions, but not everyone else's questions. My questions.
Nice.
They didn't know that we had this coming, but guys, you know the way we roll. We are going to look at a number of things that Roy talked about, and you are going to tell us what you think the answers are. So in classic style of our Wednesday, Monday, Friday classes, here's your poll. And here is your first question. We'll do 5 and then we'll go for break. Five, 4, 3, 2, 1. All right. Agile means documentation is not important. Roy, what's the verdict?
So I would suggest not necessarily true. What we would suggest is that Agile is less important than you might find in traditional approaches, but it's still really important. Think about it this way. If you don't do documentation, how are you going to know what was done, right? So documentation is still very important to us, but we're going to evaluate to see if it's good documentation.
Thank you, Roy. That is absolutely correct. So Agile does not mean documentation is not important. And Roy specifically said that. So that is false. It just means that our focus is not entirely on that. We are so obsessed with documentation. Oh, my project management plan. Oh, my scope statement. But not in the world of Agile. Here's your next question. And I'll relaunch the poll. The Agile Manifesto states individuals and interactions over what? You guys remember this? Each question is about 10 seconds. See that you remember or you don't. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. This is where it gets a little bit tricky, and it's just to make sure that we are following. Let's end the poll, share the results, and majority, like who wants to be a millionaire? when you ask the audience, the audience is correct. It's individuals and interactions over processes and tools. Well done. You were listening to what Roy said. Here's your next one. Let's relaunch the poll. Yes. So I think what we could do, Roy, if you mute your end while I'm speaking, then they won't hear the echo. I think it's bothering some folks. Thank you. All right. Do you still hear it? No, they don't. Okay. Thank you for chatting into me. All right. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Let's end the poll. Share the results. Somewhat polarized. Working product over. This is where you choose the one about documentation. So majority chose B, and they are correct. So working product over comprehensive documentation. Again, it's not to say that documentation is not important, but we focus on those things on the left, right? The ones on the right are not bad, but our focus is on the ones on the left, like Roy said. All right, here's your next question, and we just have two more. The Agile Manifesto states customer collaboration over now this is a little bit tricky. There's a missing word here. But to be fair, the word should be negotiation. So, but which of them is closest to what you saw? I'm really putting you in the hot seat now. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. So Roy, can you comment on this one? Because I really threw a wrench in it, didn't I?
You sure did. Absolutely. So absolutely. This is number D. So customer collaboration over contract negotiation. And what we're really talking about here very quickly is make sure that we're talking with our customers. Don't just take what they have requested. Ask them and have a discussion about, is this really what you want?
Thank you, Roy. All right, here's your last question. And this is from what Roy just talked about before we ended this last session. So at regular intervals, the team reflects on five, 4, 3, 2, 1. We got a perfect one on this one, Roy. Everyone chose A.
And just real quick, Phil, I'd like to suggest that in these sessions, you may actually discuss B, C, and D, right? But the statement is become more effective. Absolutely. Well done.
Awesome. Well done, my friends. So, Roy, I do not see any questions in the queue, but if there are questions, can you guys chat them in right now, and we will take them because we are 2 minutes past. We have a little 5-minute break we want to have. Okay, so Roy, does Agile really work in construction?
Yeah, great question. So there is a process that you might be interested in if you're doing construction. It's called lean construction. And it actually works very, very well. In fact, I have friends who build golf courses, and I trained them, helped them through that process, and they were able to improve their efficiency and get their contracts done faster as a result. So 100% it does work, but not exactly the same way. Obviously, when you're doing with physical construction, physical objects, there's a lot less flexibility you can deal with. Lean construction focuses more on the flow of materials, the flow of resources, the flow of information, making sure we're at the right place at the right time. So absolutely can work, just slightly different approach. All right, let's see.
Question from Sandrea. My bad, I was on mute. And the question is, what percentage of the Agile Manifesto will be on the PMP exam? What should we focus on? It's a great question. Sandrea, so you know, we have the Agile Practice Guide. There's a reason why the PMI gives you this, along with its lousy sidekick, this one. There's a reason why they give you both, because they expect you to at least know how Agile works. But the PMI has not come out in the current exam to tell you how many questions or what percentage will be Agile. They just tell you we could come from anywhere. Now, on the CAPM exam that has a more recent outline, all throughout that theme, you see Agile mentioned across all the knowledge areas. So it is important you know Agile, and that's why Roy is doing this for us, so that we can have a more robust, holistic idea of Agile. We'll be familiar with the manifesto, we'll know the principles, we'll know the values, and when the PMI gives you anything in the world of Agile, you will feel at home. You'll know the terms, the things won't be foreign to you. You know, he talked about the retrospectives, wasn't it, Roy? That, you know, he mentioned that. So terms like that will not be alien to you. But as far as knowing the precise number of questions, no, we don't know. But I can tell you, Roy and I have both taken the ACP exam. So based on what I've seen in the ACP, I know they're going to test you on the logic of Agile more than just parrot fashion, repetition of the manifesto, right, Roy?
Absolutely agreed. What we want to encourage is we don't want you to just remember these things. We want you to understand these things, so that when questions come, not just when questions come up on the exam, that you'll be able to, glean what some of the answers are going to be, but also so that you can actually make use of this. We want you to practice these things and get value out of doing it in your jobs, not just on the certification.
Thank you, Roy. Great one. We've got a question here. Under value number 5, it was said to trust and allow the team to do their own work and let them make mistakes and not beat them up, which I agree. But what if the mistakes cost the customer money?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So here's the reality. Think about it this way. People make mistakes, and sometimes it may cost money, not just your customer. Could be all kinds of mistakes. We know what they can look like. As long as your team is not doing it with malicious intent, as long as they are doing the best job that they can with the information they have, their knowledge, their skills, they are doing their best job, then sure, there might be some level of repercussion. I can promise you, the team member already feels bad about doing it. Mm-hmm. They don't need to be yelled at. They don't need to be beat up. We're going to accept that this happened. Let's not do this again. The idea is don't make, we say fail early, fail often. Failure is okay. It's okay to do that, but don't repeat your failures, right? The idea is learn from them, stop doing them, and don't make it happen again. But I think we can all accept sometimes mistakes can be bad, but let's not beat them up over it. Let's treat it appropriately and with respect. That's what we're trying to get to.
Absolutely. Yes, Roy. Thank you very much. So I think at this point, we can conveniently go on our 5-minute break. I'm going to start the timer. And when we come back, we'll continue from where we stopped. So I'll see you guys at 11 past the hour. So I'm going to count down on the screen and pause the recording. And when we come back, we continue from where we stopped. Okay. Oh, wait, did we have one more? Oh, we have a comment. A comment here, Roy. Unfortunately, we have some unforgiving customers because they think we are the experts. So, again, Agile is a mindset, and it needs a lot of education and a lot of reminders. So customers themselves and stakeholders, they also need some coaching, right, Roy? They need some help.
Absolutely. And think about it this way also. We say that it's okay to make mistakes in Agile. It doesn't mean that it's not okay to make mistakes in traditional approaches also, right? Mistakes are going to happen, and how we treat those mistakes is going to have an impact on employee retention, customer relationships, stakeholder, all of that sort of thing. So think about it this way: stakeholder management still exists. You still have to do it. If you're doing Agile or traditional or whatever you're doing, you still have to do stakeholder management. We've all had to deal with customers that are difficult. We all understand that. And unfortunately, a process is not going to solve that problem. It's about relationship building and proper management of your stakeholders. That stuff doesn't go away.
Thank you, Roy. We have a rather interesting one, and we want to offer value. Speaking of Agile, the way we're doing these questions right now, Roy, is Agile, because if I was in a fully planned driven, I would have said, all right, we said we're coming back at 11 past, we should have left. But in the world of Agile, we embrace change and we embrace modifying things. So there's a question here, which is interesting. I'd like you to answer this one, Roy, before we go. It says, I'm not sure how Agile value number 12. So if we can go back to your slide so that everyone watching after the fact can see what the number 12 one was, but it's really about what the team does at the end of a sprint, more or less, or time period. So at regular intervals, the team reflects on how to become more effective. So, I mean, Roy, speaking about the daily stand-up and speaking about retrospectives themselves, isn't it fair to say that this is a wide net and not just talking about at the end of the sprint, but on a continuous basis, we do this in some way in the world of Agile?
Absolutely agreed. So the primary mechanism that we have is the retrospective, right? That's every couple of weeks. That doesn't mean it's the only mechanism. So we want to make sure that we are continually reflecting on how we're doing and improving. The real idea here is to build a culture, a mindset of continuous improvement. It's called Kaizen culture. And the idea is that we are always looking to get better. Kaizen means continuous improvement. It comes from Toyota Production System, lean concept. And the idea is look at opportunities, look at failures, look at successes, and just ideas and concepts as opportunities to succeed and get better. If you don't take time to improve, if you don't look back at how things are going and take specific actions to improve, you're never going to improve. So take a little bit of investment and spend some time getting better, and you're going to be much more efficient as a result. That's kind of the idea.
Thank you, Roy. Absolutely. And one thing I learned from you, Roy, in our last discussion about these meetings is what happens in Vegas stays in Vegas. This is not what you're going to document in a lessons learned register and say, Phil destroyed the schedule. Next time he should never do that ever again. That kind of thing. No. Instead, we refrain from documenting what we honestly share. Right, Roy?
Absolutely. Again, go back to the behaviors. If people are making decisions and having discussions about things that might be sensitive, and let's face it, if you want to fix problems, sometimes those discussions have to be sensitive. They might be about a manager, they might be about a customer, and that can be very sensitive conversations. If we force the team to document everything they talked about and produce meeting minutes of your sessions, they're going to be less transparent, they're going to be less honest, they're not going to have as necessary discussions, and then they're not going to be as good as they could be. So these need to be very safe opportunities, psychologically safe, so the teams can talk about whatever they need to talk about so that they can fix problems, right? Open, honest transparency at all times. Sometimes people don't react well to that. So we need to make sure that the team feels safe in having those conversations.
Absolutely. And this will be the last one we take, just so that we can have some structure around what's coming in the next one. But this says from Pedro, in value number one, value number one, it is interesting that 35% of the requirements will change. So how do we make sure we know what the customer wants? Reality is that our customers should know their business better than anyone, but yet they don't know what they want. Roy.
Yeah, wow, is that true, right? Our customers should know their business. They know their customers. Our business folks rather should know their customers. They are customer facing theoretically, right? In most organizations anyway. The challenge though is often when we get requirements from our business folks, they give us solutions. They're not stating their problem. They're not stating what they would like to fix or the need for something. They are very often saying, build this for me. And that may not be the right thing. So once they receive it and we give it to them and say, hey, this is really not at all useful, but it's what you asked for. Well, fantastic. We can have that discussion. We can point our fingers at them and say the requirement was bad. You shouldn't have asked for it. But the reality is we did not deliver what they wanted. So that's not something we want to do. So let's make sure that we talk with our stakeholders as often as possible. And it doesn't mean that we are order takers. Just because our customers ask for something does not mean that's what we should do. We discuss it, we negotiate it, we understand it, and sometimes we show them alternatives that might be better. So yeah, they should know the business better, but we know the solutions better typically. So there should be a collaboration to make sure we're building the right thing.
We'll take a break here, 5 minutes. I've got it all queued. And when the timer stops, it means it's time to get rolling again. So see you guys in 5 minutes. Thanks for answering the questions. Roy, thanks for asking the questions. We'll see you guys in 5 minutes.
Great. Thank you, Phil. So just very quickly, there is a question in the chat window, which I'd like to answer very, very fast, because I think it's actually very valid. And that is the question about, is this where the product owner comes in and helps with the requirements? So absolutely. Now, if you remember principle number 4, where it's talking about business people and the team needs to work together daily. This is the important part, making sure that we're always building the right thing. So if our business people meaning the product owner, the person that's representing the business and owning the product. If they're working with the team on a daily basis, they're building a good relationship, and they can understand that when the team says something could be done better a different way, the product owner will accept that, saying, well, they're being honest with me. So that's what we're trying to build there. The product owner is a critical aspect. So you can see how important it is to have business folks working with the team. But again, it's very, very difficult to get organizational agreement for that to happen. It's a great question. All right, let's move on. Let's talk now, and let's talk a little more about making a case for Agile. Let's move into that direction, that discussion. So this actually means a couple of different things. One is making sure your team is willing to do Agile, making sure that people on the project are willing to accept Agile as an alternative, and also maybe helping our leadership to understand that this is a viable alternative. So the first question that we should probably be answering is, what's in it for me? Right? So why would an organization want to go Agile? Why would a team want to go Agile? What's the value to the people that are either recipients or impacted by this in some way? What's the value to them in doing this? So you think about it this way. Traditional approaches typically have longer running cycles. Not always, but they typically are longer running cycles, usually months, 6 months, a year, multiple years. And in some cases, that's still going to happen. What we want to encourage instead is a more frequent, iterative, and incremental release of valuable product to our customers. Now, here's the value to our organization. The organization gets product faster, small pieces of product. And I want to emphasize that. They don't get the entire project finished in a month. That doesn't happen. They're getting pieces of the project during that time. So they're getting perhaps incremental return. Think about it this way. If I can deliver a small piece of functionality to my customers, get it in their hands, and then that might increase sales or improve customer satisfaction, or in some other way improve the services or functionality of the organization, then that's a good thing. That means I get that incremental return, I get it early, and perhaps I can use the increased revenue that we might gain from this thing to pay for additional functionality. So this might be a way for us to take pieces of product and use those pieces of the product to fund the rest of the product. That can be very valuable. It also can put you in front of your competition. Doing something before your competition has it can be really valuable. And obviously, we want to be careful and make sure we're doing it with high quality, but getting out there faster means you might have a competitive advantage. Now, let's think about it from your customer's perspective. Why would they want us to do Agile? So again, same basic argument. If I can get things into our customers' hands faster, that means that they get the changes that they're looking for, they get the improved service, the improved product faster than they would on these longer running projects. Now that can be a double-edged sword. So think about it this way. If they're getting stuff faster, that's awesome. They get to reap the rewards of that, get the value from it. But what if they're getting it too often? There's a cost to a release, a cost from the organization getting it into their hands of the customers. But there's also a cost in that if something is being released too frequently, that might annoy your customers. Now, example that I always use, and this is not to put any organization down, not in any way, but for a while there, Adobe Acrobat Reader, they were releasing so fast and frequently that I was typically getting more releases than I was actually spending time using the product. And that was really annoying me. I had to turn off automated releases or automated updates because I didn't use the product that often. It was maybe once a week at most. I was getting releases more frequently than that. So, to consider that, right? There is a right speed to your releases to make sure your customers are getting functionality fast enough, but not so fast that it's annoying to them, right? So find that balance. Now let's talk about the team. What does the team get out of doing Agile? So one thing is they get a better environment. They get an environment that maybe we're spending more time focusing on their enjoyment of their job, their fun. We build fun into our processes, and we call it serious fun. What we mean by that is you should be able to have fun at your job and do your job, right? It's the fun that we have is to improve your capability of doing that job. We play games in Agile. We have fun to build up the relationships of the team. So remember, we invest time in building good teams. So some of that means play games, have fun, do things that are not work related in order to improve those times that are work related. So they might be able to get a benefit of a more successful, more pleasant environment to do their jobs. They gain trust because they're producing things faster and the stakeholders are trusting them more. Perhaps leadership can start treating them differently. I've worked with a lot of organizations where perhaps leaders weren't properly trained to do their jobs as leaders. Let's just put it that way. I'm trying to be as kind as possible there. I've seen a lot of organizations where maybe leadership needs to be shown how to be good leaders. Yelling at people, putting people down, forcing people to do things that they don't want to do is not a leadership attribute. So those are not the things that we want to encourage. But being a catalyst, leading by example, trusting the team, we call it, and we're going to talk about it a little bit more later, we call it servant leadership. The idea is that the leadership is there to say, this is the direction that we're going. This is why we're doing it. This is our mission, what we're trying to achieve. Now, what do you need from me to get there? Right? It's kind of like the JFK mission to the moon kind of statement. His mission to the moon was basically, this is hard. We know it's hard. This is why we're doing it. Now, I'm here to support it. That's basically what he was saying. So let's go do that hard thing. Let's go do that difficult thing, but you let me know what you need. That's leadership. So the concept is that we build up this environment for the team so that they feel better about their jobs and they can be more engaged and maybe be a little more creative. Now, that doesn't mean that a team has total power over everything they do. It means they have scoped decisions that they can make to make sure that they feel like they matter, right? There's a great quote that I like to use. It says, I would not want to work for a team or work for an organization where they value my output, but not my input. People like to matter. They like to feel like they're part of a bigger solution. They like to feel like their input matters, right? No one wants to be there and just take requirements and churn them out. It's a machine, right? We're dealing with people. We tend to forget that. So this is an environment where team members can grow, build great relationships, learn new things, and maybe have some fun at their job as well. Now let's talk about the individual. The individuals can benefit because, again, same basic concepts. The job that they enjoy, people that they like working with, they get to learn new skills. They may get to have an opportunity where they're doing things that they've never done before. Often when we're doing traditional approaches, we assign work to people and we say, this person is the best at this, so they should always do this work. That actually causes a lot of organizational challenges. First off, it creates that key resource problem that we've all experienced sometimes in our lives, where we have one person and only one person that's capable of doing something. That's huge organizational risk. And quite honestly, the people around them don't really enjoy that. They would like to maybe try some of those things themselves and see if they could do it. Maybe they're not going to be good at it first, but they get to learn it. And then over time, they get to improve. So now it's a good organizational investment, and the team member has now leveled up their job skills. Now, of course, that's also a double-edged sword, that we might level people up to the point where they leave. They've got now a set of skills that are so valuable in the marketplace that they move on to other work. Well, you can't always avoid that, but we do want to focus on employee retention to make sure that we're not wasting our investment in these people, right? So those are some of the reasons that we want to do Agile. One thing I want to point out, though, Agile does not necessarily mean faster, better, cheaper, right? Those are typically the three things that people are looking for: faster, better, cheaper. Well, Agile is not always faster. It's not always cheaper. It should be better. That's the theory. It should be better because we're focusing on higher quality. We're focusing on delivering value and not just what's in a requirements document. So it should theoretically be better. But if we're not doing a good job of defining what is important and what's valuable, then it's not the process that's at fault here. It's prioritization and making sure that we're feeding the team properly. Let's talk about cheaper for a second. So we hear that a lot, that Agile is cheaper. Well, it may not be. Go back to principle number 5, hiring motivated individuals. When you are hiring highly skilled people, they're not necessarily cheaper. Hiring lower skilled or other regions for hiring on cost alone, And that's not necessarily what we want to encourage. And I'm not saying we don't hire for cause. Of course, that's going to still be a factor. But we want to first focus on hiring the right behaviors, the right skill sets, the right location, so that we can be as efficient and effective as possible. That doesn't always mean cheaper. It might mean that it's going to be potentially more expensive. But if you look at the other things that we gain from it, we're building higher quality product. We're getting into the hands of our customers faster. We're delivering product that is more valuable to our customers. People are more engaged, more creative, more innovative. All of these things, you get a huge return from that potentially higher investment. So let's not say that Agile is always cheaper, better, faster. Should not be our goal. Our goal should be producing higher value for our customers and delighting them, right? That's kind of the goal. All right, let's move on a little bit and talk more about attitude and behavior. Now, this is where Agile really comes into play. Again, it's not just about the practices. Practices are important to us, but the behavior of the people doing the work and the behavior of our leadership and our organization, that's really what makes this whole thing work well. If we continue to react the same way that we do in traditional approaches, Agile will have a very difficult time working. You see these things happen all the time. I've seen Agile get blamed constantly because the organization didn't adapt. They didn't adjust. They followed the practices. So we're doing Agile, we're doing daily stand-ups, so we're doing Agile. Well, that's not the way that it works. The practices do not make you Agile. It means you're following practices. That's it. Process does not mean success. It's a factor of it, but it doesn't mean success. What's really important, and I think hopefully you're starting to see this with the manifesto, is that how people behave is far more important. If we have people that say, I got my work done, so I don't care if the team gets their work done, that's your fault. That's not what we're looking for. We're looking for team members that work well together. And if someone needs help, the rest of the team steps up and helps them. So we work together as a unit, not just as individuals. When someone finishes their work, the first thing I want to hear from them is, who needs help? How can I help the team get their job done? Those are some of the behaviors. We want transparency. We want honesty. And these can be very difficult for us to develop. One of the big things that we want to build is trust. And trust is really hard. And I'm not talking about the level of trust where I can say to somebody, where I can trust them to do their job or get something done. That's not just what I'm looking for. I'm also looking for the level of trust where I can tell somebody, hey, you didn't do your job. You didn't do this the right way. What are we going to do to fix this? I need to be able to challenge my team members, my peers, and know that they're not going to be upset with me for doing so. I need to know that they are my friend, that they trust me when I am making these criticisms, that I'm doing it to help get better. That is really hard to build that level of trust. And there are techniques that we can make use of. There's a good book called The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team. A really, really good book. And it talks about some practices on how to improve teams. In the 5 dysfunctions, the base level dysfunction is lack of trust. Without trust in a team, the team will never really form. They're just going to be a group of people that are working together. And that's not what we're trying to build. We're trying to build people and build a team that trusts each other at a very deep level, to the level where you can call someone out for not doing their job. And they're going to treat that with respect. That's really important. So you can see the behaviors, the psychology of all of these practices is very, very important to us. And we want to make sure that we are focusing on these as part of the maturity of the team. Now, let's talk about the biggest challenge to adopting Agile. And that's organizational culture. It's not the people doing the work. It's not failed practices. It's not that that Agile won't work for our project. It's that the organization will not adapt to these different ways of doing things. If people feel, the teams, if leadership especially feels, well, the teams, they can go off and do this Agile thing as long as I don't have to change, that's not going to work. And eventually what happens is leadership will eventually blame Agile for the problem when it was actually themselves that caused it. So we need to have leaders that understand what it means to them, how they need to change in order to enable Agile to work properly. Now that means taking a step back. It means not making all the decisions. It means letting go control, even though you probably never really had it to begin with. It means not forcing your will on people. It means decentralizing decision-making. These things are hard for leaders to do. I went through this personal transformation myself. It was hard for me to do this. I was very much a command and control kind of manager. To tell you a very quick story, this was a number of years ago. I worked at a large bank, and I had a pretty good sized organization, about 75 people, somewhere around there. And I brought Agile into my organization, and it was working pretty well. But I felt that I could get more out of my teams. I felt there was more efficiency that I could gain. So I viewed it as my job, even with that size of an organization. I viewed that my job was to make sure the teams had everything they needed, and I was going to accomplish that by going to all of their meetings. So you can imagine a group of 75 people, how many meetings I was going to. I was doing nothing but team meetings. So fortunately, I had a Scrum Master who was fantastic, and she put a lot of trust in me, and I really appreciate that she did that. She was very strong for doing so, and I always call her out for being one of the most courageous individuals I've ever met. Now, I'm 2 levels above her, and she came to me one day and she said, Roy, I really appreciate what you're trying to do by coming to all of our meetings, but I want you to stop it. I want you to stop coming to our meetings. And I kind of looked at her like there was a level of respect for having said that, but also, what the heck are you doing? Why are you telling me how to do my job? So she explained the situation. She said that people are not being open when you're in the room, so I need you to go away for a while. So I appreciate it, and I said, okay, so here's what I'll do. Let's give you 3 months. I will walk away, leave you alone for 3 months. I'm always here. You can always ask for things, so I'm not going away. I'll just stop coming to your meetings unless you ask me to come to one. And we'll do this for an experiment of 3 months. So she was okay with that. And the really interesting thing that happened was about a month later, I was looking at the data from my teams and their efficiency levels, and it went up dramatically. And I was shocked by this because I realized the only main thing that was changed was me going away. And that was my aha moment in my Agile transformation, my personal Agile journey, that I was actually causing the problem. My leadership style was to be heavily involved, command and control, tell people what to do, be actively involved with my teams. And that was actually the wrong approach. So then I went through the process of thinking, so what's my job? If I'm not telling people what to do and I'm a manager, what's my job? So fortunately, I had a mentor who's a very senior individual, and talked with him for a little bit. And he said, well, Roy, you need to think about where your value is. Your value is not telling people what to do. You've hired good people. They know their jobs. Let them do it. Get out of their way. So I thought about it for a while, and I realized that my job was not actually to manage down. My job instead was to manage up. Talk to my stakeholders, talk to my senior leaders, make sure the team had what they needed, and they would come to me when they needed something. I didn't have to go to them all the time. Always make myself present so that they could come to me whenever I wanted to, whenever they needed to, but don't force it on them. Let them be open and honest and let them do their jobs. But they need to know that they can trust me when they have a problem. So that completely changed my career. I was no longer managing down. So it freed up so much time for me to instead manage my stakeholders, manage my leadership. So it changed how I function. And it was that moment where I became a very different style manager. That's the kind of thing that we want to encourage in our leadership. Leave the teams alone. As long as you have hired well, you do not need to tell your teams what to do. They will figure it out because they're smart people and because you've done your job as a manager and hired smart people. I like to say that whenever I hear people say, or hear a manager say, that my team needs to be driven to get their jobs done. Whenever I hear that, I tell that manager, and they don't like hearing this, the fact that you need to drive your teams, it's your fault. It means one of two things. Either you have not hired properly, and you need to do something about that, or you need to make sure that you've built an environment where they can actually do their jobs. So you haven't given them the level of the environment of where they can be self-motivated. Either way, if a team needs to be driven, it is management's fault for either not hiring well or not improving the environment and keeping them motivated. So managers don't like to hear that, but it's kind of their purpose, right? Their whole job is to make sure that they have built great teams. And that means often leaving them alone and letting them do their jobs, letting them feel, and letting them know that their input is important and that they matter. So hopefully you can start seeing Agile, again, is not just about practices. I would also suggest that these kinds of concepts of servant leadership, decentralizing decision-making, work with any kind of process. You should be looking at these as more organizational concepts than Agile concepts. These are the things that you can do to gain efficiencies. Those are some of the techniques. All right, so that's, I think, good enough right now for the behaviors. Let's move on a little bit and let's talk about some core concepts. So I want to share my screen here again. There we go. Okay. Come on, respond. There we go. All right. So here's a core concept that I want us to understand. And this is about how we define success. I think you're starting to get the idea a little bit about what how success can change in an Agile environment. And it shouldn't just be about the triple constraints that we're used to. They're an aspect of success, but they don't collectively just define success all by themselves. So in traditional approaches, and this diagram comes from the DSDM, which is another Agile approach. It's used a lot less often. It's the dynamic system development methodology. But you might actually see this in the PMI practice exam, just suggesting. So in traditional approaches, we're all familiar with this. Typically what we get is you get a requirements document that says, here are the things that we need you to do. It's generally viewed that this is fixed. All of these things need to be built. And even if there's some variability, we know how it works. Typically, what's requested is usually required, right? So scope is typically fixed in most traditional projects. Then what we typically do is we go off and we estimate the schedule to produce all of that scope and the budget that it's going to take in order for us to meet the schedule and the scope. All traditional project management concepts. But there's some challenges with this. Again, just because you've met all scope on time, on budget, even if it's perfect, it doesn't mean that you have met success. It doesn't mean your customers are going to be happy. Now, happy customers is not in the triple constraints. And in the Agile space, that's one of the most important things that we want to focus on. And it should be in traditional approaches as well. If you're not making your customers happy, it doesn't matter that you've delivered stuff on time. You've delivered things that aren't going to be valuable to your customers. That's not necessarily a good view of success. Now, I'm sure you're probably recognizing that in many of your organizations, that is how you view success. And maybe we need to make some adjustments there. Now, I also want to suggest that this is somewhat contextual. There might be some kinds of work or some types of projects that you absolutely have to deliver everything on the list. And that's going to happen. It's very contextual. But this is kind of the general idea of how we view projects, that this does not necessarily define success. So there are really two hidden constraints, maybe three hidden constraints that we don't really talk about in more traditional approaches. And one of them is quality. So we tend to use quality as a buffer. So you think about it this way: if you get to the end of a project, you're running out of time. And what do? You're running out of time. So typically, first thing you want to go to is reducing scope. That's fantastic if you can do that. But if you can't, then what we generally do is we reduce quality. We sacrifice quality in order to make a date, and then we fix it once it's in production or once it's completed. That's not necessarily a good way to approach it, because if customer satisfaction is one of the most important things that we want to deliver on, then producing poor quality product or lower quality product is not going to satisfy your customers. Quality should be significantly high on your list of attributes for success. Now, another hidden constraint is the people. So what we typically do, again, end of a project, running out of time, still have a lot of stuff to get done. Usually what organizations go to is overtime. We push them, work more hours, do what you have to do. Can you come in this weekend? Now, there's a problem with that. Again, we talked about this. People get tired. Their health can suffer. Their family lives can suffer. They become less creative, less innovative. They feel like they don't matter. And they might get this project done, but they're not going to feel like they're very valuable to the organization if they can just be burned out at a moment's notice. So they might leave. And now that's very expensive. So fantastic. You met a deadline. You got that project out, but now the team is exhausted and may quit. Right? That's not a good place to be. We're not just looking at one project. We're looking at the overall life cycle of an entire organization. We should be looking at the organization as a system. One project success could cause the organization to fail, or at least cause some failures in the organization. So treat it as an overall system. Failure of a project might actually be better for the organization in some cases. And that sounds a little weird. So let's not burn our people out, right? Because that causes all kinds of problems. All right, so what we tend to do in an Agile environment is we tend to focus, we flip the triangle upside down. We still have these constraints, plus the additional constraints, but we treat it a little bit differently. So what we do in a more adaptive Agile environment is we fix the schedule and fix the budget. Now let's talk about first how we do that. Fixing the schedule, the teams are going to work in regular time boxes. These time boxes are called iterations or sprints. The difference between an iteration and a sprint is really just what practice you're following. It's the exact same thing. It's a simple time box within which you get work done. That's all it really is. So let me back up. So a sprint is what Scrum calls it. Iteration is what basically every other practice calls it. They are literally the same thing. So the team works in regular, consistent time boxes. They start at the same time every time, and they end at the same time every time. They're not variable time boxes. So within this time box, the team is getting work done. If they don't get everything done within the time box, you don't extend the time box. You simply say, this is what we got done in this time box. Okay? We'll talk more about that to help you get that concept in a little bit. So if you can fix the schedule by the team working consistent time boxes, typically 2 weeks, now we've got some constraints to put in place. Now we've got fixed time boxes and even projects. There are these agile challenges out there, agile myths out there that in Agile you can't give dates. Nothing could be further from the truth. And in fact, in Agile, we actually like fixed dates. We work in time boxes. We like to get a date. We like to say, this is the date that we're going to meet. We prefer that. But there's something that we require as a result of that fixed time box, and that is scope has to be flexible. So let me back up a little bit and go to the traditional again. So we've all seen this happen. We start out saying that the scope is fixed, and we estimate the schedule and budget, meaning those are potentially variable. And we know how this works. As soon as you say, this is the scope, this is the schedule, this is the budget, most organizations fix all three of them. Now, the PMI even says that you must have one of these as variables, but most organizations prefer fix, or at least within certain percentages or tolerances of these numbers. That's not necessarily a great approach because it causes other challenges, or organizational challenges. So let's get back to our adaptive processes now. So we fixed our schedule by working time boxes. 2-week increments are our typical time box, sprints or iterations, same thing. We also then do release time boxes. We do project time boxes. They're usually very short, but everything we do is done in a time box. Now let's talk a little bit about the budget. Now the budget is also typically fixed. Now the way that we do that, we have a team that is working on a regular schedule, a fixed time box. Now the way that we fix the schedule, the budget rather, is you think about it this way. When we're talking about budget, we're typically talking about labor expenses. Now, obviously, there are other things that are a part of a budget. There could be, fixed assets, license costs, other things that happen as well. But we typically are talking about labor costs because normally that's the most expensive part of a project. Not always, of course, but it usually is. So we can fix the budget by building consistent, stable teams. So we build a team, and we're talking about teams that are relatively small. The industry average is anywhere between 5 to 9 people, so small teams. And if you need more capacity than 9 people, you build multiple teams. You don't add more people to your team, okay? That's a concept, again. We'll talk about that a little more. So what we do is we have a fixed schedule, a fixed budget. The budget is a stable team, not pulling people in and out of the team constantly because that makes your budget now variable when we pull people in and out. So fix the schedule, fix the budget. Now we've got those 2 items fixed. Now, the next thing we do is now we can estimate how much work we can get done within fixed schedule and fixed budget. The important part is scope is flexible. Now, this is going to may sound a little bit scary in that now we've got change chaos. We're moving things in and out. The customer may not get everything they want to, but keep in mind that every 2 weeks we're taking checkpoints. We know exactly where we are at all times. We're building product rather than phases. So if the product is not being built according to that schedule and budget, then we'll know it very early. We know throughout the entire process where we are. And it's a very accurate measurement. Let me throw a little caveat, not at first, because when the team first starts being built, they're usually not very good at it. So early stages of a team, they're not going to be very predictable, not very stable, but they get better very quickly as long as we give them the support to be stable and be predictable. Okay, so that's kind of how it works. Fix the schedule, fix the budget, vary the scope. Now, quality is one of those constraints that we are always doing our best to produce highest quality product. Team members, we're not overburdening them. Remember, sustainable pace. So we're doing our best to not force them to do more work than they can get done within that time box. And so that's the concept. All right, let's move on a little bit. We'll spend another few more minutes and then we'll take another break. Let's talk about Agile acceptance and buy-in. There are other core concepts that we'll cover throughout the next part of the sessions, but let's get into Agile acceptance and buy-in. So similar to what we were talking about, making the case for Agile, we were talking about what's in it for me. Well, that's really how you get acceptance and buy-in. Let's talk about the importance of buy-in. So what do you think is going to happen if the team wants to go Agile, but leadership says, nah, I'm not so sure about this thing, or your stakeholders aren't so sure about it? If they are not bought in, the team will always be challenged. And even subconsciously, leadership or stakeholders could throw up roadblocks and really inhibit the team's productivity. So let's make sure that we are open, upfront, transparent, talk about what they get out of Agile, how it's going to improve, and the challenges they might face as well. When a team first starts doing Agile, they're going to be bad at it. That's expected. They're learning a new process, and they have to go through their own personal transformations as well. Lots of behavior changes that they may not be used to. So it's going to be a bit of a challenge for them to go through that as well. Let me just realize I'm still sharing. Let me stop sharing. There we go. So let's make sure that we have complete buy-in, or at least tacit buy-in, to do an experiment. Now, there might be opportunities where you can do some prototyping, do some experiments to see if Agile is going to work well, what challenges you're going to face as an organization. I can almost guarantee you the biggest challenges you're going to be faced are not the team members. I typically get brought in as a coach to talk, to work with teams and get them to do Agile. It's usually not the teams that are the problem. It's usually leadership, management, stakeholders. Those are the folks that really need the most amount of help to help them understand their part in the overall process. Consider if you can't get a product owner from the business. That's going to be a challenge. Now, I'm not saying you can't do Agile without a business person representing the team, but it's going to be a bit of a challenge because the team is going to have to wait for decisions. They're not going to have direct customer contact or stakeholder contact, so they will be slower as a result. You will be slower adopting Agile if you can't get that to happen. So it can still work, but you're not going to be as effective. Hopefully that makes sense. So hopefully you can see the importance of getting acceptance from your stakeholders and your leadership to do this properly. If you can't, then you might have to do some other alternatives. I've worked with a lot of organizations that are afraid of Agile. And typically what I do with those organizations is I kind of gently ease them into it. So there are two practices that we're going to be talking about primarily over the course of our session. One practice is Scrum, and the other practice is called Kanban. That's Kanban. Two very popular practices. They both have huge advantages, but they're different in their approaches. Kanban, Scrum rather, in order to make Scrum work, you really have to make changes in your organization to enable Scrum to work properly. Kanban, you could start doing today without any organizational change. All you have to do is create a board where you put up all of the work so that you can visualize what's working on, change some very simple practices, and then start executing. And you use this to then evolve over time. So when I'm faced with an organization that doesn't really have good buy-in to Agile, or might be afraid of going Agile, I typically start them using Kanban. It's a very simple practice. You can start using it with just a few hours worth of training, and it's so simple to start. It does not require organizational change to start using Kanban. Instead, you use Kanban to show the organizational challenges. It exposes the problems you have, and then incrementally remove those impediments from your efficiency. So different approaches can help you gain buy-in of actually doing these practices. Now, again, I'd like to encourage you, if we will be talking about Kanban most likely next week, actually definitely next week, but I encourage you, you could start using Kanban today and start getting some efficiencies, okay? All right, last thing I want to talk about very quickly, and then we'll take our break, or answer some questions rather. Challenges. Let's talk about some of the challenges. So certainly we've already talked about some of them. Getting buy-in, leadership may not be prepared for it. They may not understand the change to them and what it means to them. Stakeholders may not really get the concept. Keep in mind, we're going to be showing the product evolving over time. You might have some stakeholders that say, well, don't show me anything until the whole thing's done. Well, that just defeated a lot of the Agile concepts. We want to show it to you frequently so that you can tell us if we're going the right direction. It's that feedback we're looking for. We might have some stakeholders that say, I'm glad that you showed this to me, but where's the rest of it, right? So you might have some stakeholder challenges. That you're going to have failures, right? We want to have honesty. We want to have transparency. And when you have a failure, you want to be able to say, yes, this happened. This was wrong. This is what we're doing about it so it doesn't happen again. You want to be able to show that. But you might have stakeholders that may not actually agree with that concept. They might get very angry when they see that. Some customers are like that. We understand how that works. So those might be some of the challenges. Now, let's talk about some team level challenges. Team members that are the lone wolf. They feel that they are the experts in their area. All they want to do is their job. They don't want to work with others. They are the type A personalities that just give me your requirements and I'll do it. I don't need to ask you questions. Document everything. Give me the requirement and I will go off and do it. That's not what we're looking for. The old days, let's face it, especially in the software world, a lot of people got into software, myself included, was that we were shy. We didn't like talking in front of people. So now encouraging people that you must communicate with your customers, communicate with your team members might be a little bit jarring. Gone are the days where team members can disappear for months on end and just not talk to anybody. It doesn't exist anymore. We are encouraging them to collaborate. And if they can't do that, we need to help them get to the point where they're able to do it. And if they can't, we need to discuss other options, right? So those are some of the challenges that you might face. I'd like to pause here. Phil, I'd like to open it back up for you.
Thank you, Roy. Very interesting session. I love the human pieces because there's always a misconception when you go into a company that, a new process, a new system of processes. Let's go to town with them, but they don't have the mindset. The mindset is usually a problem. It's warped. So in this little section here, as usual, we will ask you guys a few questions to make sure that you have been following along, listening to what Roy has said. So let us relaunch the poll and let us very rapidly take a look at a few questions. Agile is always cheaper. What did Roy say about this? Agile is always cheaper. True or false? 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. End the poll. Share the results. Remember, the word always is a very incriminating word. Roy, what do you have to say about that word? Always.
Yeah, so I think you can say always is never a good, is always not a good word, right? So obviously Agile is not always cheaper. It could be, and we hope it to be cheaper. What we're really looking for is better throughput so we can produce things faster. While maybe not cheaper, we can potentially increase our return. That's really what we're looking for.
Absolutely. Thank you. Let's go to our next one here. So that was false. Here is our next one. In Agile, behavior is more important than following practices. Here is your poll relaunched. What do you guys think based on what Roy said? Oh, and of course, option A is true. So you have A true and B false. Which one is it? 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Let's end the poll. And those are the results, Roy. Looks like we got a home run that one. Any comments?
Sweet. Yeah, just real quick, I'm glad that everyone's gotten that. Hopefully you're seeing how important behaviors really are. And again, I would suggest behaviors are important, not just for Agile. For anything we do, we want to encourage good behaviors. And we'll talk about some techniques to help direct behaviors and encourage the right behaviors.
Great. All right. What did Roy say about a sprint? A sprint is a what? Five, 4, 3, 2, and 1. Let's end the poll. Share the results. And the answer to this one was time box. Any comments, Roy?
Yeah, absolutely. So it is a fixed time box. Again, within that, we are going to accomplish a certain amount of scope. We are going to deal with certain risks, and it does help us mitigate risks. But the idea is it is a fixed time box. Starts on time every time, ends on time every single time, right? And we'll talk more about the advantages to doing time boxing. It's significant. So we'll talk more about that soon.
Cool. Here's your next one. In Agile, which of the following is fixed? Fully plan-driven project managers in the room. Use the other side of your brain. 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. Let's end the poll and hear the results. And very good attempt across the board. Your answers are not wrong, but some of them were not complete. So the answer to this one is indeed the schedule and budget. So well done. It's the opposite of how we think in plan-driven. Any comments, Roy?
Yeah, so this is, as you just mentioned, this flips your head upside down, right? You really have to think differently. As project managers, this is the thing that you really need to make the adjustment on. Scope is the variable, schedule and budget are fixed. And at the end of our session next week, I'm going to show you a really cool technique to help us forecast scheduling and budget. The way we forecast in Agile is really cool. You're using data rather than just simple guesses. So I think you're going to really like that because it's very visual and a great way of forecasting your projects.
Awesome. We got one more question from me, and it is, in Agile, which of the following is flexible? Again, you just answered the reverse. Should be easy. Five, 4, 3, 2, 1. In Agile, we forgive. Just remember that. Remember, we forgive what we do not forgive in plan-driven. In plan-driven, everyone's like, no, you're adding scope, you're gold plating. But in Agile, our mindset is, if it offers more value, we want to do it. We don't want to keep saying, no, you can't do that. You can't do that. So Roy, any comments on this?
Yeah, so this one is, again, as project managers, this is a key little twist in your behaviors and your mindset. So think about it this way. Often project managers get very concerned about scope being so flexible. But what we want to do is maintain that fixed schedule and budget. So let's say we have a timeline, we're all fixed, we're running, everything's going great, and a stakeholder says, hey, I know I asked for this, but something has come up and instead I need this. Well, we have two choices here. One, we can reject it and say, nope, everything is planned. You're getting what you asked for. Or we can say, yes, we can accommodate that, but there's a cost. And that cost is something of equivalent size comes out of your schedule and budget. So we're basically replacing like-sized items. So we're we manage the impact to our schedule and budget by replacing like-sized items. Okay, so it's very controlled scope, very controlled schedule and budget, I should say.
Gotcha. Thank you very much, Roy. And here from our friends, we have a few questions. Let's take a look at